A lot of piece of paper. What is your name? Hurry up, you got 10 seconds. First name, last name. What is your name? Hurry up.
I don't know.
Hurry up. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, I need all the papers in the next 10 seconds. Looks like people are doing pretty good on this one. Second by the papers. Better than me, dropping some. All right. 3, 2, 1. Oh, just missed it. Had so much time off. At least be seeing you anyway. Started off with some extra credit. All right. Well, we're so kind of fast forwarding. I'll do a quick little review, but I don't want to spend too much time on the video that you guys were assigned. So basically all of chapter 12 that I wanted to go over is on that recording that's still on Blackboard. So if you haven't looked at it, you should watch that recording. And there's a lot of notes on the board. You should take down in your notes just like you were in class on that chapter. What it brought up was the idea of government influencing private sector borrowing and some other things. In fact, I might leave that up. Maybe I'll show you a little bit of what I did in Vegas. It's actually related to that. So let's see, where's my markers? There they are. So the crowding out effect is the one I'll just do kind of a quick recap on, see if you have any questions about it. So when the government, we learned last week, when the government doesn't collect enough taxes to pay for its spending, what must it do?
Get a loan.
Get a loan, right? So it has to get a loan. So from last week, a government savings, which is kind of a joke, would be tax revenues collected minus government spending. And since G is bigger than T, we have a deficit. So since they don't collect enough taxes, we must borrow. So when G is greater than T, we must borrow through what's called government bonds or treasury securities or treasury notes. Treasury securities, or more generally, government bonds. So, when they become a big borrower, then they end up competing with other people in the loanable funds market. And so one of the issues is what's the impact of big government borrowing in the loanable funds market? The loanable funds market is actually even global because foreigners will also buy American government bonds and other sorts of bonds. Investors are roaming the globe for the best deal. And so we have people that are in demand of loanable funds. And you can kind of think of banks and other people supplying loanable funds. But the banks are really not supplying their own funds. They're supplying household savers. So the savers, the top saver, if you will, kind of the dominant saver, are households. Americans, usually with some gray hair, that are saving more money than they're consuming. And so they are supplying funds, trying to get the highest rate of interest possible, right? The supply of loanable funds is upward sloping. Higher rates would induce them to supply even more. And the dominant demander of funds is business. But second place is government, at least in the United States. Now you go to China, and China's up here, by the way. So they might have been savers. So there is government saving that goes on in different countries as well. Okay, any questions so far? All right, so now what I'd like to do is imagine there's a balanced budget. So if government spending was zero, there'd be some interest rate, let's just call it 4%, just to make up a number. And all of the funds being borrowed would be all business because government has a balanced budget. So let me put, with my little business and government, let's just put balanced budget demand, BB. So last week we talked about the balanced budget. That's when the government has collected enough taxes to pay for its spending. And if that's the case, then that means the only borrowers out there, at least for what we're modeling here, is the dominant one, businesses. So businesses are borrowing these funds at that rate. And so maybe it's $15 trillion. $15 trillion worth of funds are being borrowed. All right, so now, if the government doesn't charge enough taxes, if they run a deficit and have to borrow, what happens to our graph when they need to borrow money? Are they a demander or a supplier?
Demander.
They're a demander. And so is the demand curve going to shift to the right or to the left when the government starts running a deficit? What's going to happen? Shift to the right or to the left? Tim, Caroline?
To the right.
To the right, right? So there's an increase in the demand for funds. They are a demander of funds, right? They need money to pay for weapons of mass destruction and welfare programs and other things, Medicare, Medicaid, all the stuff that the government's spending money on. They don't have enough in taxes to pay for that stuff, so they demand borrowed funds. They're a demander of borrowed funds. All right, so this is what the demand curve shifts to with G greater than T. So I'll put G greater than T. And by the way, this is a total recap of what's on that recording. I might have spent more time on some of this, so if you're, make sure you do that recording to get all of that detail. What happens to interest rates? They go up. So interest rates go up not only just for the government, but for everybody because they're just part of the marketplace, right? So interest rates were at 4% and now they jump to 6% because of the government increasing the rate. Not increasing the rate, getting into the market. You know, some would argue maybe not being responsible. If we look at the government running a 40-year deficit, I might not hold them totally responsible if they were having a surplus and then a deficit, but so the government persistently being in there drives up interest rates, and so the new loanable funds amount here is higher. And so maybe this is at $17 trillion now being borrowed. But the crowding out effect is this. If you're a business and interest rates are going up from 4 to 6%, do you borrow more money or less money? If you're a business, less, right? Because this was essentially your demand curve because this is the one with the balanced budget. So when interest rates start to climb, businesses borrow less money, so they're not buying as many machines and buildings and factories and expansions of their business. Interest rates are going up. And so the private businesses are being crowded out of the loanable funds market. They're getting some pressure because the government's in there borrowing funds and driving up rates. Does that make sense? So this horizontal distance ends up being kind of important. So if loanable fund, and let's call this PLF, the private loanable funds, goes down to 13, the difference here is the government deficit. The government came in and borrowed $4 trillion. That is the deficit. This horizontal distance here of 17 minus 13. And this is the amount of crowding. So this is the crowding out. They were borrowing 15, but they were crowded out a little bit. So this is the amount of crowding out. All right, so questions on that?
Do you think the government being in so much debt's ever gonna actually start to blow up in our face?
Yes. It's going to be, blow up in our face is probably not the way I would frame it though. So will it become a problem is what I said yes to. Blow up in our face, it's more of death by 1,000 cuts. So all of a sudden, one cut, no big deal, one cut, no big deal, one cut, give me a Band-Aid, one cut, give me a Band-Aid, cut. And then all of a sudden, instead of moving like this, you're starting to move like this. Why am I so sluggish? What's going on? I just don't feel quite right. Cut. And then before you know it, you're in big trouble. And then you might have to do something. So that is more of how I'd identify the problems that we have with this stuff.
I guess I just wonder what it looked like.
Yeah, it's not going to be a big drop out of the sky, fall over, but that's part of what I spoke on. So when I was in Las Vegas Monday and Tuesday morning is what I presented this on. And I'm probably jumping the gun a little bit for next week, but this is pretty good timing since next week is like next week from now. So our chapter's on money and banking. So I'm going to skip some of the stuff that I do here and we'll talk about it later. But part of what the government does, or has done with a new policy that came into 2008, has been able to grab onto our checking and savings accounts in the United States. And this is where I need to give you a little more background with the money and banking stuff. But they've been able to grab onto our checking and savings accounts by paying an interest rate to banks that is higher than what we're paying, the banks are paying us. So on your checking account, most of you should be getting probably 0%. Most checking accounts are 0%, right? And so a large fraction of our deposits, of course, are in checking. And then if you bring $1,000 cash and put it into your bank, you're of course earning 0% on the cash you just gave them, right? And it'll go into your checking account. But the bank is now holding that cash. Well, as we'll learn next week, currently the Central Bank of the United States is paying your bank 5.4% on your checking account, and you get nothing. I don't think that's very cool, but that's one of the problems that I'm hoping to get people up. So is $17 trillion is why I picked that number. These are the deposits in all commercial banks in the United States, 17.6 trillion, and this is what it's kind of looked like over time. So kind of a fairly steady climb. And then what happened here in 2020?
The world ended for a minute.
Yeah, we had the COVID deal, and a lot of people started saving their money instead of spending the money. Why? Because the government said you're locked in your house for one thing, so I don't have much money to spend on. And so savings rates actually climbed, so we kind of have this little stair step, and there's some other factors that cause that to go up. And so I'm going to skip this one too because it's, well, other than point out this. once this change in policy happened in 2008, the banks quit loaning out money like they used to our private businesses. So because they had this risk-free interest rate available to them, they decided not to loan out as much money because they were already getting a guaranteed rate from the government. And now at that time it was much less than 5.4%, but that's what it's climbed to. Okay, these again, there'll be more next week stuff. So this is the one that I'll just kind of hint at again. I might be jumping the gun, but the projector was up and it's fresh on my mind since I just presented this on Tuesday. So forgive me a little bit for indulging me here, but so if we apply the old policy prior to 2008 on how much money would have been loaned out to banks, to private sector, it would have been 15 trillion, which is kind of where I was getting my 15 trillion here. It would have been 15 trillion had we had that amount under the old policy. Under the new policy, we have the banks holding on to more money, and ultimately the central bank is buying these bonds. They're buying the bonds directly from the fiscal government, the fiscal side of the house. So they're buying the bonds, and it has effectively reduced, according to that calculation, by $4 trillion from private hands. So $4 trillion of less private borrowing. So it's a crowding out effect that's not really this story, because the government didn't exactly come in and interest rates went up. They were able to, maybe confiscate is the wrong word because they did it legally. That sounds like it's, well, legally you can get something confiscated, I guess, for real. But they were able to use your checking and savings accounts. And the impact of that was banks not having incentive to loan out as much money. So that's kind of the story. Here's those interest rates, some other stuff that we'll get into. And all right, so this is kind of the summary here. You get 0, maybe as high as 4 on some of your savings accounts. There's kind of this pass-through effect. It's not very transparent. We talked about malinvestment, about where's this money going. Now all of a sudden, and I even used the word, Jesse, I was bringing up here, the slow bleed, is that, what does this mean? Well, money has been directed into government hands, whatever they're doing with it, and away from private enterprise of businesses wanting to expand, buy tractors, computers, and stuff. And so less capital, we learned in terms of economic growth, less tractors next year and for the next 10 to 20 years means economic growth is going to suffer. And so that's what I meant by this. I don't think we felt the effects of this policy change yet. And so there was my recommendation. Abolish the policy, which probably won't happen, but I think it should be eliminated and we go back to the old way. All right, I know that was kind of quick and a lot of stuff you guys haven't seen yet, but that ties into a different type of crowding out effect. Does anybody have any questions on what I just showed? We'll learn more once we get into that monetary chapter. But this was also a good tee up for the chapter we are on today. So, all right, let me kill this.
I kind of have a
Yeah, go for it.
question.
I'm just.
Like, even if we were to get out of debt and start making money, what would stop us from simply spending it, not saving it?
Are you talking about the government?
Yeah.
Getting out of debt. So getting out of debt is really too big of a stretch, but having this equal each other puts a plug in the debt, right?
Yeah.
And then as the economy goes on, that won't be as big of a problem. But that, if I heard you right, you know, what are they spending their money on? Is it on something productive or good, or is it on, you know, something else that's fairly unproductive or wasteful? Yeah, and that's where I think we're getting a better bang for our buck by pushing money back into entrepreneurs' hands, who may lose money too, by the way, right? So they might invest in a new building and then that goes bust and the building's not worth as much. But the good thing about the private enterprise system is that there's like thousands of, let's call it entrepreneurial experiments going on at one time. The test of time says some of those are going to hit it big, right? And we're going to get some new innovations in technology that change our lives from some of those, right? We're going to get a really good return on probably a lot of those, but even if it's just a handful of them that we get some really life-changing stuff out of, that's a good deal, even if the other ones, a lot of the other ones go bust. And so by pushing money into private sector hands, we have thousands of little experiments going on. Some of them are going to go bust, some of them are going to go good. If we funnel money into the government, into the hands of the few, whoever's the leader of the government at the time, combination of president, Congress, whatever, right? And maybe if there's some cronyism, some other influential people in the government, they put their money on a race pony, like housing, and then they're wrong, everybody gets hurt. They put their money into COVID money to everybody, and then we all get hurt through 10% inflation. See how their mistakes, because there's 1 point of breakdown, if they bet wrong, if they made the wrong decision, if the COVID crisis wasn't handled maybe in the best way, then a lot of people pay the consequences. There's a lot of big consequences across the country, possibly even around the globe, but let's kind of keep focused on the current country. That the housing crisis is one, with interest rates being kept low and gotta buy a house, kind of all these incentives from government to buy a house, caused the housing crisis and contributed to that downfall. So I'd rather have us diversified, right? Push the money out. There's a lot of wisdom in pushing the money out to private enterprise and have thousands of these experiments going on, where even if half of the 1,000 experiments pop, it probably might not affect me, right? It's bad for the banker and the investor and the people who, did something over here with that experiment, but it doesn't really affect the nation like inflation did with the COVID deal and housing prices in 2008. Okay, questions, comments there?
How would we even go about stopping crony capitalism?
Yeah, that's the big question. I mean, some legislation, but it's a tough nut to crack. That's really the political problem, is we can have a lot of great whiz-bang ideas, but the people in power would like to keep things the way they are. And so there's the conundrum. It's a slow thing with me helping educate you young people so you can figure it out. And tell your friends and family that maybe there's some policies. We're not going to be able to turn the whole apple cart upside down right away, but maybe through some slower changes over time, and maybe there'll be opportunities for bigger changes. Maybe we can. All right, so this leads us right into chapter 27. So take note, this is kind of a major jump in the chapter sequence. Our chapter this week is chapter 12, which wrapped up with mostly the recording and what we just did. And then chapter 27 is on kind of focusing in on investments. Which will help tie us into money and banking next week, is part of the reason structured it this way. Okay, so again, just to kind of keep the basics down, let's write down a few definitional things. All right, so the word capital in econ class is referring to, resources that enhance our ability to produce output in the future. Could be today in the future, but. So this is kind of putting into words, we're buying man-made stuff that helps make other stuff. is my loose definition of capital. We are increasing productivity, something that increases our productivity. But capital is these resources, machines, buildings. But we also use the word human capital of investing in yourself, going to college, learning new skills or trade, getting a certification. So our capital. All right, so then investment is the flow. So investment is from our cigarettes, the C plus I plus G plus X. And it is the purchase of capital. Over some time period. So for example, 1 year. How many machines did we buy? How much money was devoted to tuition, college tuition? So kind of our annual investment, but we could break that down to monthly investment or whatever. But the point is, at a point in time, you did some investment. And to kind of tie this back to the loanable funds market, how was that investment able to be facilitated? It was through savings. And so savings is current income current income that is not used for consumption. From our cigarettes, the big C, beer, pizza, and chicken wings, so if we're not buying beer, pizza, and chicken wings, we are using some of that income for tractors and buildings and machines. So here's our income, just to put a little picture to this. So this could be just you, we could think about you being earning your paycheck there. And then according to your marginal propensity to consume, maybe you're going to devote 0.9 of your income goes towards consumption. But that means some of your money, the marginal propensity to save, using these numbers, would be 10% of your income you're going to put into savings. And then the important link we're trying to make here is that savings turns into this picture. The amount you saved ends up getting put into hands and purchases of investments. So the key link here is that savings turns into investment through financial markets and loanable funds. Okay, so any questions on that? Setting things up, some of the basics. We're going to get down to some real basic, like rate of return and how we actually calculate that. But we're going to start off with Tom on the island. So recall Tom on the island alone. So Tom is our island dweller. And Tom can go fishing. We're going to kind of change the story here a little bit and look at, make a little table. And so to the right here, we're going to look at per day and annual. And here we're going to measure the number of fish caught. Number of fish caught. And this is going to be without a net and with a net. Without a net and with a net. So on a per day basis, Tom can do 2 fish per day with 2 fish per day without a net. If he had a net, he can do 3 fish per day. And so annually, taking into account, we've got 310 days. So, got a few assumptions here I'll write down in a second, but annually this turns into, I'll just get the table done here, 730 fish. Or 930 fish annually. Okay, so we're going to have some issues here with the net building. So net building. Let's call it issues. So number 1, it takes 55 days. It takes 55 days to make a net. Number 2, the net is going to last 310 days. So net is useful for 310 days. Before it wears out. So he can get 310 days of fishing. With the net. Okay, so how many days are in a year? 365. 365. So note, there's 365 days per year. Should Tom build or make, build sounds a little too, make the net? Yeah.
Is he catching no fish when he makes the net? Or is he only making the net?
No, so that's the thing. He has to devote his whole day to making the net. Yep, he has to devote the whole day to making the net. So that's the point of the 55 days to make a net, parentheses, can't fish those days. So, yeah, Tim?
Yeah, sure.
Why?
Because 55 days without getting a net, that would be 2 fishes per day, so 110 fishes that he doesn't catch. But the net provides him with 310 times 1 fish, so 310 fishes. So there is a surplus of 200 fishes that he catches.
Okay, so let's break that down on the first part here. So the opportunity cost of net building is what?
5 days.
55 days.
So 110 fishes.
155 days times 2 fish per day. 55 days times 2 fish per day means we've got 110 fish is the cost. All right, and then what is the benefit of the net? Yeah.
310 days times 1 fish a day. So
Times 1 fish a day. So we're getting the extra increment, we're getting the extra fish, but we're not getting it for 365 days. So you want to put 1 fish per day, which gives us 310 fish. So now we've got this net gain, right? So the marginal benefit versus the marginal cost. So is there a gain from fish? So marginal cost versus marginal benefit. Since the marginal benefit is 310 fish and the marginal cost is 110 fish, you're saying do it. Okay, so can you see any potential issues here with this? Let me get somebody other than Tim. So think about you're truly on an island. Imagine you're on this island and you have to devote 55 days to the net building.
He wouldn't have food to eat for those 55
Okay, so yeah, how am I going to eat for those 55 days? So now all of a sudden we might be thinking, okay, well, yeah, you got to eat. So now I work every other day on the net or something and then sacrifice some food? Is that enough? How many fish can he survive on a day
2.
and keep his strength to build a net? Is 1 fish enough if he does every other day, right? I don't have the answer to that, but those are some of the things we need to think about. And what we want to do here is think, well, what would be, desirable? So clearly we've got, let's just put ignoring the time element. This is what I would call a no-brainer. But if you need at least 2 fish per day to live, then the net is not a good option. All right, I'll build a net. Oops, I died. Darn, that might not have been a good.
What would even be the point of the net at this point? You only need 2 a day, you can't really store it for later. Seems like a lot of effort for nothing.
Well, storing, you could get into drying fish, you know, if you watch Naked and Afraid or something, and that's kind of a common thing that's been done for thousands of years of drying out fish. So sometimes you can get some things to preserve. And again, we're going to ignore some of that stuff here. Actually, the main motivation we're getting to is just to say that we have a time preference issue to deal with. And so, people have a positive rate of time preference. A positive rate of time preference. That just means ceteris paribus. What does ceteris paribus mean again? Holding all of the things constant. Ceteris paribus, you want stuff now rather than later. Ceteris paribus, you want things now rather than later. So, if Tom, so let's put this back to Tom here. If Tom could borrow some money in terms of fish and pay it back in the future, and he could hire somebody to make the net, or this would hire somebody to do the fishing, one or the other, you know, would this work for him? So if Tom could borrow 2 fish per day, would he do it? So if he could borrow the 2 fish, would he do it? Yeah. So if he could borrow the 2 fish, how would he pay it back though? If we got the rich island dweller, so now we're having a second person on the island, banker Jen, lives a couple miles away, what would he pay back with? Let me go to the back here. Yeah, sure. His net, kind of. What is he getting from his net? Were you kind of thinking of like collateral for the net or something? It could be that too, but we're not going to have to get that deep into it. But what is he getting when he has his net completed after 55 days, and he's now borrowed, because we're assuming he needs 2 fish per day to live. I'm kind of playing on that. How would he pay back the net at the end of 50? How would he pay back his loans? Because he has this net after the 55 days. Back with fish. Now, would the lender be willing to accept 2 fish back? So we have 110 fish. So Jen the banker loaned Tom 110 fish. How long did she give up those fish for that she loaned him? 55 days. Is she willing to take 110 back as payment?
Probably not.
No, that'd be a raw deal for her because Jen the banker has a positive rate of time preference also. So in order to induce banker Jen to do the loan, what must Tom do?
Pay your interest.
Pay her interest or pay her back more than 2 fish, right? Woo! Right? Now we see the financial markets being born here, kind of all based off of people's time preferences. A market is born as long as we have somebody with some surplus fish, we have some trading that can go on in effectively the financial markets. So if Tom could borrow 2 fish per day, would he do it? Yes. But he must pay back banker Jen more than 110 fish at the end of 55 days. Because she has a positive rate of time preference.
But if that would be the case, he wouldn't get that, would he? Because he can't make or give up 2 fish or more than 2 fish in 55 days. It would take him more than 55 days to get 110 fish from the net.
Well, that's what we got to figure out here. Is there, how much can he afford to do to make it happen? So she needs to get more to have incentives. So she has a positive rate of time preference. Let's put parentheses, needs incentive to do the loan. So now we negotiate. Negotiating time. Now this is where this problem could be all over the board. We can have fractions of a fish. Maybe she just, I'll take half of a fillet, or we can cut that fish up into smaller parts. But we could structure the loan. Could Tom afford, under our, let's say you have to consume a minimum of 2, could Tom consume to give up 1 fish every day? Yes, that's kind of low hanging fruit, right? So negotiating time, there's many combinations of payback that could work. So I kind of want to point that out first, but let's just try one of them and just see if it works or not. So example, Tom pays 1 fish per day after 55 days for 110 days. Yeah.
Why after 55 days?
Because this is the time Tom needed the money to make the net. So Tom had to make the net. So banker starts giving out
He loans
the
the
fish.
fish.
Yeah,
He loans the
she's
fish.
loaning the fish, and And again, I don't want to complicate it more than it needs to, but maybe she's giving 2 fish every day or something, but you know, we're already getting pretty complicated. Hopefully you guys will have it in your notes and you can kind of see it come back just for the main point we're trying to get to. So after 55 days, for 110 days, so what that means is after 165 days, banker has the loan amount paid back without interest. So Tom paid the 110 fish after the 165 days. So far, the banker's okay with this. All right, I'm going to get my fish back after 165 days, right? I'll be made whole, so to speak. But that's not good enough for me. I need some interest on top of the principal payment that was made. I want a little bit extra. So now, does Tom have extra to go yet? Yeah. So Tom's got some extra to go. How much extra does Tom have? Possibly, but again, you might be right with your math, but I'm just looking at this one. So Tom had a benefit of 310 fish, and so now we still have some fish left over, right?
Right.
Yeah. So we got the net benefit was 110, but that was after taking into account the loan. So we still got some amount to be paid back. And so this is where it would be negotiable. Maybe she'll take a half a fish from there on, and that would be good enough for Jen the banker. Maybe she wants a full fish. So that is the negotiating part. So I'll put this as a bullet. The rest of the payback is now interest on the principal of 110 fish. So once that net was made, we still had another 310 days to go, right? Is that here? Yeah, 310 days before it wears out. She's paid back in 110. We have 200 days left. So Tom has 210 days of net use left. So if you guys are still tracking,
Isn't it 200?
200, sorry, yes. We took 110. So 200 days of net use left. So, question, would he offer 200 fish? Would that be a good move for Tom? For the rest of the 200 days, would he offer 200 fish to him? Could he afford it? Yes, he could afford it, but was he any better off if he did 200? Now that's everything, right? So I would say, no, that does not make him better off relative to no net. We want to do better than no net. So now we've got a range for the market. Tom could go up to 200, but he wouldn't want to go any further. And the banker would be willing to take some fraction of a fish. Would she take 1/10 of a fish? Maybe. As long as she got more than just her payback of the 110. So somewhere in that range between 0 and 200 is going to be the range that makes each party better off. So, key point. Depending on each party's rate of time preference, the agreed upon fish interest, if you will, the agreed upon fish interest will be between 0 and 200 fish. And I do mean between. It can't be 0, it can't be 200, but it could be anywhere in between. Potentially, in theory, makes them both better off. So, for example, would banker Jen agree to 1/2 of a fish for the next 100 days? So, hey Jen, I'm going to cut this fish in half. That's your interest, I get to keep the other half. That's the deal on the table. Now, we've learned already that in theory, it could work, but it depends on the rate of time preference. So, but I want you to drill down on that a little bit deeper. Now you be banker Jen. You're banker Jen. This is before the deal starts, by the way. Remember, all of what I went through is Jen and Tom prior to the net being built, right? So Tom is, at the bank, sitting down in front of the banker. Hey, I'm Tom, I'm a fisherman. I'm thinking about building this net. Here's the deal. 55 days to make the net. I can afford to pay you some interest afterwards because I'm up a fish per day. What do you think? What can you do for me? And banker Jen says, oh, well, that looks like a promising business opportunity. What's going through? I want you to put you through Jen's mind now. Let's say that Tom throws this on the table, this half a fish for that bonus 100 days. What's Jen's decision on whether she wants to take it or not going to depend on?
Still only one person, like these two persons.
No. I'll loosen that up a little bit, although we could make it. But Tim asked, do we still only have these two people on the island? So now we're Florida now, and so we got thousands of people. So what's her answer going to depend on, if that helps you out?
What that half a fish could get her?
Yes, in part, but remember, we're making the decision before we get the fish.
In theory.
In theory, yes. So I'm really thinking about giving up 110 fish. I'm Jen thinking, okay, well, let me do the math here. So today, you want me to give you 110 fish. And in return, 165 days later, I'll have my full 110 back. And then you're offering to give me a half a fish the rest of the way for the next 100 days. That's our situation. What is going through banker Jen's mind? Yeah?
Almost 50% increase of her.
She can do the math. So let's say she says it's 50%. What would make her want to take that or say, no, that's not enough? Other than pure greed. What else is going through Jen's mind?
Other than it's giving her more fish.
It is giving her more fish. Let's see, I thought I wrote it on here. I had it somewhere on here. Does Jen have an opportunity cost?
Yes.
Yes. So what's going through Jen's mind is, what else could I do with my 110 fish? Right? What are my other opportunities? If this is the best opportunity she's seen in a long time, she might say, yeah, you got a deal. Hands are shook and we got a deal. If she's seen 5 other applications come in that day, and all of them have a higher rate of return, we're starting to identify her opportunity cost of doing the lending, right? And so what is her opportunities on whether she does it? What we focused in on was really Tom's opportunity cost, right? We said, should Tom make the deal? And then we're back to, well, if Tom could, we could change this whole thing. If you can dry fish, Tom can live on 1 fish. Now Tom's just saying, I'm gonna starve but not be dead, but I'm gonna go a little hungry. I'm willing to sacrifice some hunger to make the net to be a rich guy later. And he kind of internally solves the problem. But that again depends on Tom's rate of time preference. How much does he value fish today relative to fish tomorrow? So my point in kind of highlighting this is that in the market for lending and borrowing, opportunity costs are key. Opportunity costs are always key in economics. It's one of the top 3 principles out there of thinking, well, what else could I be doing? You guys, some of you are here because mom, dad more or less forced you to come here. But I hope as you're here taking my econ class, you start thinking, is college right for me? Would I be better off getting a job at Walmart distribution center and earning $22 an hour right now? They would hire me. They're desperately looking. That's $44,000 per year. What is my opportunity cost of sitting in my seat and listening to McCullough 5 days a week for an hour? What am I giving up, right? What is my opportunity cost of college? So you've got lost wages is one thing. Now, you go run and grab the $44,000 Walmart distribution center job. What do you got 10 years from now? Did that generate higher income for you 10 years from now, taking the distribution center, more or less manual labor, low, no skill job? Or did the college degree land you something that's now paying 20 to 30% higher than what the low, no skill job is, right? So did you get yourself 10 years from now after graduation, established in a career? Maybe your starting pay was still around $40,000 or something, but you were able to climb the management ladder and move around to a few jobs, and now you're making $60,000, $65,000. But remember, that $60,000 or $65,000, that's 20 years from now, right? So how do I value that income relative to the $40,000 you could be making at Walmart DC today, right? So everybody's looking at what are their opportunities, and that's the economic way of thinking. So before I go to questions here, let me get that down on the board. So would Bank of Jen agree to 5 fish? I'm just gonna put here depends on her opportunity cost. And what is that? Well, if she does not lend to Tom, what is she giving up? If she does not lend to Tom, what else could she do with her 110 fish? And so for Jen, if the rate of return, ROR, from Tom, if the rate of return from Tom is greater than a rate of return from some other opportunity, rate of return from other best alternative, then do it. Do the loan. Do the loan with Tom. If Tom's deal of a half a fish after the 110 has been paid back, is that the best she's got compared to her other opportunities? Make the loan. Tom's happy, Jen's happy. We've got two people making an exchange in essentially a financial market for future trades that's working for both of them based off of the interest rate. So the last thing to tack onto that is what the interest rate is and how that's different, the rate of return for each person. So note, the interest rate is what determines whether each person should do it. So the price of money today, is the interest rate. So the whole time here we're thinking about money today versus money tomorrow. Okay, any last questions there before we'll tie this up? All right, so springboarding off of that, let's kind of jump into a little more modern day scenario of just thinking about how interest rates work. So if you have $100 today and you have an interest rate of 10%, how much will you have tomorrow? So 1 year from now, you're going to earn an interest rate of 10%. You're going to put in $100 into the investment. Well, how much do you have tomorrow? 10% interest on $100
You mean the day
invested.
it starts to interest, or the day?
Yeah, so you're going to give up $100 today, put it into an account, not trying to trick you or anything. How much is your account worth 1 year from now? 110, right? So 110 is the account balance. So how did you do that? Well, you guys probably didn't do this formula. You probably just did it in your head, but 10% of 100 is 10 bucks, right? And then it's 100 plus 10. Well, from a formula standpoint, that looks like this. 100 times 1 plus the interest rate, which, let me actually, instead of doing I, let's put the 10%. equals 110. You have the 100 back, and then you have 10% of 100. You add them together. 100 plus $10 gives you 110. What if you let it ride one more year? How much is your account value now? 121, right? So if I let it ride, I'm gonna let the balance ride one more year. I get the same thing. 110 times 1 plus 10% gives you 121. So now my account value is 121. All right. Well, you guys are this close to deriving the most fundamental formula in finance. And if we do a little algebra here, notice that this sucker is this sucker. And this sucker is equal to this sucker. So let's put this sucker in for this sucker and look at what we got. Does that make sense? Let's try it. All I'm saying is we see that this is equal to this, so let's put this big thing in here. So for this 110, and what we get is 100 times 1 plus 10% is the big sucker, times 1 plus 10% equals 121.
And the name of this formula?
We'll get there. Let's do this first. How can I simplify? Those of you who are maybe more mathematically inclined than others, but all of you have seen this in the class, it's just whether you remember it. How could I simplify this whole expression? Make it a little shorter. We got 100 times 1 plus 10% times 1 plus 10%. What would we do that? What is it?
I don't know how you call it.
Put the little 2 up above,
Yes.
squaring it, right? Isn't this 100x times x? 100x times x, you remember that problem from algebra class maybe many moons ago? I don't even know if that'd be algebra or not. I guess it's algebra, right? 100x times x is equal to 100x squared. This times this. So now check it out. We got 100 times 1 plus 10% squared equals 121. I started with $100. I ended with 121. All of you knew how to do it, but now you just derived the present value and future value formula, the time value of money formula. So what's going on here is that this is the present value of your money today. Remember I asked if you put $100 of your own earned money, it was $100. That's the present value. That turned into a future value. By doing what? By getting an interest rate over some number of years. So we got the present value times 1 plus the interest rate raised to the number of years equals the future value. Where I is the interest rate or rate of return that you got. And N is the number of years you had the money invested. Number of years invested. So this is bringing your money into the future, but another way to look at it is if your money, if I told you I'll give you $121 2 years from now, what do you think it's worth to you? Well, if you could be, now you got your banker Jen, if you could have been earning 10%, then you can kind of work the math backwards and say, it's worth $100 to me today. So using the same thing, the other key way to arrange this is that the present value of money can be thought of the future value discounted by that number. All I did was move this chunk over to the left. All right, we'll pick up there tomorrow. Get into some more investing stuff.